In this video, I'm gonna make a custom wave of Sonic themed LEGO sets, each with increasing price points, going from $15 all the way to $100. Let's get started. You might be thinking to yourself, Aaron, LEGO has already made several Blue Blur sets, and that is true. LEGO has released a total of 14 sets, with 3 more on the way. But they're not based off the games, with one exception. Rather, they exist in their own worlds that sometimes references the games. Also, cocktails canonically exist in this world, and Amy knows how to make them, implying she's an alcoholic to some degree. That's all fine and dandy, but I think the Big Blue fandom could use some sets based on the games. So I'll be designing 4 sets that LEGO refuses to make, each of which will represent the most iconic part of a Speed Demon title, the boss fights against the Egghead himself. It seems fitting we start with Sonic the Hedgehog. It released in 1991 as the very first game featuring the fastest thing alive. This is the only game that LEGO has adapted to some capacity, making it the exception I mentioned earlier. This LEGO idea set right here, it represents the first zone, Green Hill Zone, by far the most iconic zone, so there's no question in my mind that we must build it too. Our first set is priced at $15. The base is 28 studs long and 20 studs wide. The first thing I'll do is tile off the area of the base and place brown plates where the actual build will go. Here's what we have to work with. Next, I'll build up the terrain. This zone has a checkered pattern of brown and orangish tan, the latter of which isn't a common color, so I had to do some digging through my collection to build up the walls. Next, I began building the grassy area, switching between lime green and green plates. We interrupt this video with a PSA, LEGO lovers everywhere. Remember that if you plan on using brown pieces, to think long and hard about if you should place it down, because apparently they're one-time use, and if you try to remove them, it'll shatter into tiny freaking pieces just like my fragile heart. Alright, we have the first section of terrain done. In the boss fight, there's 2 floating platforms for you to utilize, so I'll flip our set around and place these transparent poles to support the platform. This looks great, so let's build the world's fastest hedgehog and his archenemy Eggman. Finally, we can build Egghead's device of destruction. LEGO's idea set includes the flying egg, but doesn't include the wrecking ball, plus it's built for this brick butt ugly brick-built Eggman. I'll be basing mine off their design, but making minor tweaks to make it minifigure scale, and overall trying to change it enough to call it my own, while still resembling LEGO's version. Here's what I came up with, and after placing it on our builds, we're done, so let's take a final look. This seems like a good time to mention, if you love the Blue Hedgehog and LEGO, check out the Chao LUG in the description. We're building every Blue Buffoon game in LEGO and cataloging it on Instagram. I also have a playlist of everyone's videos, so you can check that out too. There isn't a whole lot to say about this build. The game is pretty simple graphically, and I want to avoid steering too far away from the source material. As a result, the build is pretty simple. Funnily enough, I've played the first 3 levels of this game way more than the rest of the game, because for most of my childhood we only had the demo, meaning this boss fight was at the end of what little Aaron got to play. I think this build turned out great, especially the Egg Wrecker. Would you pay $15 for this? Let me know in the comments. To be frank, if LEGO put out a set this big at that price point, I'd conclude that miracles do still occur. But the pincushion managed to defeat this contraption, so let's move on to the next set.
Get a load of this!
Next, we'll design our $30 custom LEGO set. The base is 40 studs long and 20 studs wide. This set is going to be based off Sonic the Hedgehog 2, released in 1992. The first boss of this game is the Egg Drillster, shown here. Does it look familiar? That's because LEGO is about to release their own version of the vehicle meant for crushing critters. It doesn't seem like LEGO's too concerned with accuracy in this case, so I'm taking it upon myself to build a faithful version. You know the drill.
Get it?
First, I tiled off the base and planned where the terrain would start. This set was a bit more difficult because it was important to me that I properly represent the pattern in this level. It's interesting how much more complex it is, considering it only came out a year after the first, which simply had a checkered pattern. After some trial and error, I settled on a design, so I went to work duplicating it and building up the walls. I'm using a similar lime and green pattern that was in the last set, but you can see the grass area is thicker in this game, so to accomplish this I'm using slopes and angled bricks, which looks great. The next thing I did was build up the trees and place various flowers around the base. Finally, I designed the drillster itself. My Instagram got to see this a few weeks early. If you want to get updates on videos and such, you should follow me over there. Here's the second set of our wave. I really like it. I think I did a good job capturing the evolution of the game titles. This one gives off a similar vibe, but it's more advanced from a technique standpoint and level of detail. My favorite example is the design for these flowers. I used the cherry accessory to try to recreate them, and it's one of the more unique ways I've seen them utilized. Sonic 2 was when Tails was first introduced, so let's build him and place him attacking Eggman alongside his little blue savior. Instructions for the drillster are available over on my Patreon. Anyway, the blue rat destroyed yet another of Eggman's creations, so let's move on to the third set. For our $60 set, we'll be moving forward in time all the way to 2017, to one of Blue Wind's most recent 2D outings, Sonic Mania. Mania is one of my personal favorite games, and we'll be building the spider egg robot from the Flying Battery Zone. Here's what it looks like. It's probably one of the weirdest things we've tackled so far. The base is 26 studs wide and 44 studs long. I started by building the elevator portion that's lifting up Sir Sonic Knight of the Wind through the level. Most of this section isn't anything too special, but I got to use this scrumptious purple masonry brick for the first time in a build. I've had them for a while from the pab wall, but I'm glad I finally found a use for them outside of the marble zone. This one is different because it's more vertical than the previous two. We'll have to build walls and some kind of rafter system to hold up Eggman's creation. I started by building up a column of light gray and dark gray. Initially I planned to use cylinder bricks for this part, but that ended up feeling like the lazy way out, so I went for building a half cylinder using modified bricks and cheese slopes. Here's what it ended up looking like, and I made an identical one for the other wall. Speaking of, I began designing and building up the first wall of the build. I took a lot of inspiration from my Sonic Unleashed build, which has an industrial feel but maintains a relatively colorful palette. After replicating the wall design, here's where we're at. I'm rather happy with our progress. While brainstorming ways to hold up the spider, I found this great Lego piece in my bin of unusable parts. Unfortunately, I only had 2 of them, and my build was going to require 3. So I did what any normal human does. I bought a Lego set with the intention of only using 1 part. Again, I need to stop this from becoming a habit. Anyway, I began working on Eggman's Metal Menace. This one was pretty tricky. I'm working with a pretty small space, and the design of it is really weird. You can see here it has a gold design around the base, and I struggled for a while to accomplish this, but I settled on using a gold pipe that bends around the base. Next, I built the legs and constructed them to the base. Instead of an abdomen, this spider has a huge bumper with a yellow star on its butt. Here's my recreation of it, so all I have left is the cockpit of the mech. This portion was particularly tricky, and I ended up removing the legs and the arms of my Eggman minifigures so he could fit inside while keeping the proportions accurate. But now we have the final product. I love how this one turned out. The color palette and theme of the mech are so different from the other sets so far. I've built this yellow pole with spikes on the opposing wall. In the game, you have to use the pole to gain momentum and strike Eggman into the spikes, which is a pretty creative way to utilize the bumper mechanics. Because of how the build is structured, I had a half stud gap in between the main base and the walls, so to get around this I used the ever useful Brickhead's brick and light gray tiles. On the other side we have the orangest tan tiles, and I've placed them in such a way that there's a bit of depth to this layer. Overall, this build came together and ended up being my favorite build from this video. Let me know what yours is down in the comments, and what game you'd like to see next. Like I mentioned, I was glad to use my purple masonry bricks for the first time. I'm slowly expanding my color collection of these bricks, and soon I'll have them all! But Modern Sonic managed to defeat this build, so let's move on to the final set of this video.
I'm 100 miles from your location and approaching rapidly. Start running.
For our $100 set, let's go back to 2003, the year Sonic Heroes was released. It's one of the most revered eyeless trigger games, so I felt obligated to recreate it in LEGO. The boss we're tackling is the Egghawk, which you must fight shortly after traversing the Ocean Palace. To start, let's take the final base and begin tiling it off. It's 64 studs long and 32 studs wide, making it the largest build yet. I began building tan plates and light gray plates to plan out the terrain. The tan bricks represent the ocean floor, and I've also set aside some dark gray plates to show where the columns that emerge from the ocean will go. Next, I began building up the walls of the bridge. I designed a dark blue and sand blue pattern along the front-facing wall to try to recreate the art style present in the game. Of course, because of how wave-like the source material is, I can't recreate it perfectly, but I'll do my best. I used a cheese slope technique present in my Sonic Forces build. I use this technique a ton. It's a great way to accomplish some color detail in your builds. After tiling off the ocean floor, I started building the water. I was using translucent 1x2 blue bricks until I realized I had to order more. While I waited, I started working on the egg hog since I knew that would be a tad bit troublesome. Here's the dual rotors that will be featured on either end of the build. Next, I started designing the body of the egg hawk to connect the wings to. At this point, the parts arrived. Here's both baggies I purchased. The bricks are for the ocean and the slopes will be used on the bridge. After finishing up the ocean, I began planning out the pattern for the bridge. I'm utilizing a combination of cheese slopes and 1x2 red slopes to create the mosaic pattern featured in the source material. I do like how this turned out, but it's a bit too red. You can see the vast majority of the bridge is gray, but currently mine is mostly red. So I tore off different segments and began rebuilding it. I also began finishing up the columns. Here's where I'm at now. The bridge and columns are done, so all that's left to do is build the egg hawk. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll know that I stayed up late to finish up this build. I was running low on time, so I opted for focusing on the build and not recording anything. Knowing that, let's jump to the showcase of the final build. And now we're done. Here's the finished set. I'm pretty happy with this build. I still think Mania is my favorite. The color palette is lovely though. The dark gray mixed with sand green being the standout. The dark blue and red patterns look great. For the red pattern, I used a similar technique from my Sonic Forces build, a lot of the cheese slopes and such, but they don't have a connection point, rather the surrounding pieces managed to keep them in place for the most part. Also, this time around, I placed 1x1 gray tiles to fill in the gaps to make the pattern even more complex. The egg hawk turned out great, being as imposing in LEGO form as he was in game. Sadly, I don't have a way to play Sonic Heroes, making it the only game in today's videos I haven't played through dozens of times over. But one of my favorite Sonic tracks came from this game, that being Casino Park, which you're hearing right now. It was also featured in Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, which is how I found it. However, that doesn't stop it from looking sick. This egg hawk was a tough challenge due to its strange angles. Funnily enough, in the initial version of the script, which I wrote before trying to build the contraption, I said it would be easy. And yesterday's me was an idiot. I think the most interesting part of the build is the cockpit. Having to try to design a bird-themed plane while having too much caffeine in your system was a scenario I'm not keen on recreating. Thankfully, we got to include Team Sonic in this one. Knuckles is one of my favorite characters in the franchise, and the LEGO version of him looks fantastic. In fact, all of the minifigures LEGO has produced look great. I joked at the beginning that I'm doing what LEGO hasn't, and that is true. Their sets aren't very accurate to the game, but they've done an amazing job at interpreting these characters and the world into plastic form. As a ride or die fan of the legendary Blue Hedgehog and a ride or die LEGO fan, I find immense joy in seeing these two collide. I imagine some of you watching are in the same boat, and if you are, be sure to subscribe for more LEGO Faker content. Weird that Faker counts as a nickname. Oh well, the list is complete anyway. I truly hope you enjoyed today's video. A lot of hard work and love went into it. Moving forward, I hope to make bigger and better videos than ever before, and I'm able to commit to that because of viewers like you. Thanks for watching, and keep on inspiring.